Alright guys, in today's video I'm going to be taking you through rebuilding this Walbro carburetor that I'm doing today. This is a model WT210. If we kind of zoom in there you can see that model number. But this is going to apply to all of the WT series carburetors. Pretty simple. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do here, we've removed this off of the engine. We want to salvage, if you have this situation, we want to salvage as much of this gasket as we can so that we can source a replacement. So a lot of times I like to just use a razor blade to try to get this to let go intact. The engine we took this off of is from 1992. And it is a Tanaka, so there's not a lot of parts out there for it, and I know this gasket might end up being something unique, so let's just take a moment to do that so that we got that shape. Alright, so once we get that out of the way, up on top here there's a screw. You can take either a Phillips or a slotted driver. We're going to remove that. Take this top cover off where the fuel pump is. Now that can be wedged on there with many years. That's the only thing that comes off the top besides in here. There's like a little filter screen. We're going to go ahead and get a pick in a minute to take that out, but first we want to separate the parts that are here. So there's a gasket and a diaphragm, and then just like with the engine gasket, we want to try to not damage these guys when we get them to separate. And you're working on old stuff like this, everything is stuck together. But when we get the rebuild kit, we're going to want to be able to match up which one is appropriate for this carburetor, so we don't want to destroy this so we can see the shape underneath. And you can see this is primarily why we're rebuilding this. This engine got left sitting with the oil-gas mixture in it for a long time, and it's just all gummed up. Alright, so it's slowly starting to separate. Alright, so the gasket is kind of disintegrating, but we can see the outline of the gasket. So the gasket is stuck on top of this rubber diaphragm with these flaps. So you normally would have a diaphragm and a gasket separate, but these guys have kind of molded themselves together. So there's that piece, and this is the idle screw. We're just going to leave that alone. And then I got to get a pick for that, but before I do, let's go ahead and go down here to the inlet. Alright guys, sorry about that, some kind of camera glitch. Let's go ahead and keep going here. We were in the middle of removing this screw here. Once we get these four out, then we can take this cover off. Each of these screws should have a little washer captive underneath them. Alright, this one is not welded on, so that's great. A little bit of spotted corrosion on the outside, but all nice on the inside. Alright, so now we want to get this guy off. This one does look like it's going to be another adhesion issue. Just trying to find a weak spot. There we go. Now, you're not doing this for anything other than matching up new parts. You never, ever reuse stuff like this. When you take the carburetor apart, If you get this far, everything's got to be replaced. Notice I'm trying to do like a little wiggle motion. You don't really want to scrape it off because the body of this particular carburetor is aluminum. So if we try to scrape it off, we could put a scratch or a gouge in there that would result in a leak. This corner here just looks like it's particularly adhesioned on here. This is going to be another situation where the gasket, what's left of it, right? Some of it's here, some of it's on this diaphragm, but there's enough of it there where we can identify what we're looking for. All right, the next thing we're going to remove on this is there's a small screw here that's holding this little needle seat valve. So when we take the screw out, there's this hinge, there's a pin, there's a spring. It latches up underneath that clasp right there, and then there's a valve seat underneath it. I'm going to put our finger right here so that when we take the screw out, we don't have the whole thing go flying with the spring. Just going to get it off that little tang. And so there's the hinge. There's the lever. There's the spring I was talking about. And then that tang back there. When we had the camera glitch, I took that as an opportunity to go grab the pick. There's the little valve. Little needle valve assembly. All right, now that we got the pick, we'll flip back over on the other side. Kind of work this screen out. Trying to get the edge of it. Come on. We'll replace that little fuel inlet screen as well. All right, so the only other thing we can disassemble on there, two other things we can disassemble on this. We're going to take the high and the low needle valves out here. And again, there's a spring involved. So I'm just going to kind of hold on to this so things don't go flying. All right, there's that guy. And there's that guy. And then the last thing, a lot of times people skip this, but you really should take it out. We've got these welch plugs. And it's a good idea to kick them out in order to do a really deep cleaning. Just taking a look at this gasket to see if there's any more of this we could scrape off before we do that, but I don't think so. We're going to have to soak this with some solvent to get it out. So we're going to put this guy in the vise, get that welch plug out of there, and then we'll be ready to put the whole thing in ultrasonic cleaner. All right, we've got this in the vise. This WT model has two welch plugs, this large one here and this small one here, and they both need to come out. There's a special tool that Walbro provides that's kind of like a sharp chisel that comes in at an angle and lets you wedge those out. I don't have that tool, but I also don't like drilling these out. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to see if we can just deform them, see if they can come out that way. So I'm going to come in here with a spring-loaded punch just to see if I can. Whoops. We're going to need to get this a little tighter. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I want to see if I can just make a hole in it and I can get something else in here to pry it out. Very similar to how the factory tool would have done. There we go. All right, so there's that one. And that way there's no damage under here from a drill bit or a screw being used. That's why I like using a tool like this for this particular task. This one here, I think I want to try to come in from this side. Well, no, we'll do this side. And I also have this other little punch that I can use. Get that one out. All right, so both those are out with no damage whatsoever. Take this out of the vise. So now that's the level of disassembly. I'll show you in the service manual for this series carburetor from Walbro. This is the extent of disassembly that we're required to do for this type of rebuild that we're going to be doing. Now, all the parts except for this engine gasket, so that's provided by the engine manufacturer. All of these parts that we took out will be in a factory rebuild kit. And for this WT series, that's going to be a Walbro K10 WAT repair kit. And what we're going to see in here is, here's the two welch plugs we took off. We can see there's the needle valve. We can see there's the hinge for it right there. We'll still be reusing the rod, and we'll be reusing the screw. But we can see here's our diaphragm. There's one of our gaskets. This looks like the gasket for the diaphragm. But when we open this thing up, we'll find that we have this piece and its gasket, this piece and its gasket, a new one of these, a new one of these, and two new ones of these. And there should be a new screen in here somewhere. It's kind of just all jumbled up until we take it apart. All right, what's next? So the next step is we're going to have to put these parts into a cleaner so that we can clean them. All right, there's a lot of different ways and approaches that people could do this. The way I use it is I start with something that's just a mild water-based degreaser first. We're going to go ahead and run that for a couple of ultrasonic cleaner cycles, and then I'll show you phase 2 where we use a more aggressive solvent. This particular unit actually has a heater built in, so besides the ultrasonic effect, we also have the solution being heated up with a heating coil underneath. So the first cycle has concluded. So second cycle. So what we're going to do here is going to come in and I'm going to grab one of these items. This is the top cover. And now with this solution and all that, should be a little bit easier to get what's left of this gasket material off. Yeah, so now it's going to kind of peel off. So that's what we're going to do here is we're just going to go through these parts, get the gasket material that was kind of adhered on here now that it's been weakened. And then we're going to put it in for a second cycle. And then I'll bring you guys back when we get done with the second cycle. All right, second cycle is wrapping up. All right, so the next thing we're going to do, we're going to take all these guys out of here. Can't stick my finger in there because it's a little too hot. And you don't have to worry about mixing up the high and the low needles because they're different thread sizes. Get everything, just this little cover is all we got left in here. Okay, so what are we going to do now? Well, we're going to come through here and we're going to take these smaller parts, these are still pretty warm, dry them off, And we're going to put the other parts that are not included with the kit. Obviously the fasteners, the valve spring, the fuel inlet screen I thought would be in the kit, but I don't see it. Might be buried in there. Just going to get all the water off, and then what we're going to do is we're going to fill this guy up with mineral spirits. So we're going to soak all these parts in mineral spirits. And then that will be a last step before reassembly. You can use some shop air for something small like this. I just use a little can like you would use to clean off a computer keyboard. Just less of a hassle. And we can see there's still a little bit of gasket residue. We'll get that off with the mineral spirit soaking. So we're going to get all this water out of all these passages. If this was particularly gummed up, we would also come through with some thin wire and run it through the channels, but this one I really don't think has got that problem. I can open up the throttle here for a moment. This is getting not just the water out, but it's also getting any debris that might have been freed up by the ultrasonics. All right. Now we're just going to put some just regular old standard mineral spirits, nothing special. Mineral spirits is what the manufacturer Walbro recommends as the type of solvent to clean these parts. Obviously, at the time that service information would have been created, there would not have been ultrasonic cleaners, at least not affordable ones. Get all the air out of there. And then we'll cover this up. And then what we'll do is after it soaks for 15 minutes, we'll come through all these parts with a couple of nylon brushes, and we'll do some final cleaning to get the rest of that residue off, and we'll be ready to reassemble. All right. Let's bring all of these guys out and get them laid out where they can start drying so we can be ready to reassemble. These little fasteners, we'll just let air dry. Spring. Be gentle with our little fuel filter because it looks like we're going to have to reuse that. Large fastener. This fastener. This guy, I was going to use a nylon brush while it was soaking. I gave it a couple of hits with that and it just wasn't aggressive enough, so I used this brass one. Just want to make sure we've gotten all of that gasket material off of there, and I think we have. And then similarly, I want to get all of it off of here. I can still see a little tiny bit. There's a little piece right there. And if you get a little stubborn piece that's kind of resisted all this treatment so far, it's probably just fine to leave it there. But it's soft enough that the pick is breaking it up. All right, that's off. Nothing else here. Now this guy, we're not just going to let air dry. This guy, what we're going to want to do is blow him out with compressed air again. And the reason we're doing this is there could still be some small pieces of debris that got freed up and then worked themselves into some kind of a passage. Kind of always, like you see me doing, I want to aim this away so if we do hit a pocket of mineral spirits, we don't spray it in our face. All right, at this point, we'll transfer all of this to a clean towel and we'll open up our rebuild kit and start lining stuff up. All right, so all we have left from what we had originally are the gaskets, the two welch plugs. We have this little hinge and needle seat assembly. So let's open up the rebuild kit and let's start matching out what we need. Because these kits are going to have parts for many different items. I can see right there that we do have a screen. I couldn't see it before, but there it is. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take the one that we thought we were going to have to reuse, and we'll put it over here in the discard pile. And then we'll take our replacement one. Put that up here. Okay, this looks like a replacement seat, so we'll put that there. See what else we got in here. Lots of different styles and designs. Okay, there's our two welch plugs, 1 and 2. Here's our new hinge piece, pin. Just going to make sure it's the same size as the original. Yep, okay. So we've now accounted for all of those parts. Now we need to account for the diaphragm. That should be this guy here. Okay. And now we need to identify the appropriate gasket for him. Shapes and colors. That's it right there. Okay, so now we've replaced this. The last thing we have is this guy. So this looks like the correct one for that. I mean, this one is very similar, but it's different color. And as far as the gasket goes, it's going to be this guy right here. All right, so we did not use these three half moons, this particular gasket, this smaller valve, this little ring we didn't use. We did not use this gasket, and we did not use this gasket. We did not use this diaphragm. And the reason I'm holding this one out here is just because we didn't use this diaphragm either. This diaphragm looks exactly like, nope, that's true. No, it doesn't. It's got that open place on it. So this is not the correct one. I guess it is going to be this blue one because it's got to be closed down here. So not always shapes and colors, sometimes just shapes. Okay, so now we've matched everything up based on getting an exact shape. All right, now we're ready to start reassembling. What we'll do first is we'll put these welch plugs back in. So we'll get this guy mounted back in the vise and pop those to it. All right, we'll do the smaller one first. Just get him centered up there. We're going to grab a small punch and we're just going to flatten the top of it to seat it. And if we stop being so gentle with our vise, and then we're going to go take the large one right next to it. Take a larger punch. I like to keep these as flat as possible. All right, done with that. Now we can bring it back to the table. We can put this guy back in. We can put this guy back in. Can run the pin through this little hinge piece and we'll get it attached to the top of the valve. This one's a little bit of a challenge with the spring. Got to get it right underneath this little round retainer. Come on. Almost had it. There we go. Just gotta make sure it's centered under that right there. And to help us out here, go ahead and try to put this screw in. I'm going to zoom in on that in a minute, make sure we get this guy exactly where he's supposed to go because he's kind of cocked right now. Need a smaller little pick to get under there to help me out with that. Let me go do that. I don't have that smaller pick handy. We'll come back. All right, so we want to make sure we get this little spring on that little indentation that's at the bottom there. Right. There. I got the spring in place. Got that guy in place. Let's use our pick to run this screw down. If we look in, from the top here on this magnifying glass that I'm using, go back to the bench and we'll use the screwdriver in just a second. But now, you see right there, we've got this guy where we want him. So he's pushed all the way down and he's seated inside the center of that lever. All right, with this guy in, we're going to move on to a couple of other things. We're going to put our high and low valves back in. Low is the smaller thread. High is the larger thread. When you do these, you don't want to like crank them down all the way. You just want to kind of do 2 fingers until they stop. If you crank them down all the way, they can damage where they sit. And then we'll move to the top. Whenever it starts to feel resistance, that's enough. All right, now the tops. We brought the old one over here so that we can get the orientation right. First, we need to put this little screen in, little fill filter screen. We're going to go grab one of the punches that we used to put the welch plug in. Make sure we've got that seated correctly. And then we're going to put this guy here. We're going to put this guy here with this tab hanging over on the same side as the fuel inlet. And then we're going to bring this guy over on top. I'm going to have to get the throttle out of the way to get it all lined up. I'm not going to tighten it down all the way yet because I want to go and make sure that everything feels like it is lined up properly first. There's a little peg that helps make sure you've got it lined up. This is another one you just snug up. There's no specific torque value. All right, so now we can return our attention down here to the bottom. So we're going to need another tool to do a pressure test. All right, so why did we divert to putting the top on? Well, we need to have the top on to pressurize the carburetor so we can test that this piece here, this seat, is getting a good seal. So what we're going to do next is we're going to hook up a small pressure gauge. This is for use on carburetors. And we're just going to put a little bit of pressure in here, maybe 5 to 7 psi. And we're going to make sure this needle doesn't move. And that way we know we don't have any leaks. If you did have a leak, let me show you how you could test that. So if you did have a leak, you would try to get it to hold some amount of pressure, because normally what's supposed to happen here, if I put my finger here and release this, if we watch the gauge, right, all the pressure goes out when we unseat the valve. But if you got a problem where it's not holding and it's leaking down, you can immerse the carburetor in gasoline and you can try to figure out where the air bubbles might be coming from. Like, we can see here, that even though we passed that test, if we zoom in, there's a teeny tiny leak on this gasket. Right there. You guys see those air bubbles streaming out? So actually, even though it looks like it's holding, probably need to give the screw on top just a little bit more turns to squeeze that down. So I wasn't even expecting that to happen, but that's a perfect example of how you can use this test to identify a leak. All right, now that we're sure that we have passed the pressure test, and by the way, you want to make sure that you can see both the gasket and the diaphragm have this little piece that extends over on the side with the fuel inlet to know that you got all that right. We're going to flip it over, and we got one more thing to do before we put the gasket assembly down here is we got to check that the index lever is correctly set. Now for that there's a special tool, and this special tool is calibrated for different Walbro carburetors. You can see the different model numbers are stamped into this. So we're going to use the side that says for the WT series. So this is the WT, the WA, and the WTA are all going to use this. And if you look at this, you can see this middle piece is slightly longer than the other two pieces. They kind of do it like a logo, like their W for Walbro. But you can see that's the calibration. And what we're looking for is we're looking to lay this on the carburetor, and we've got to get this indexing lever. If we zoom in here, we can see there's a gap. We got to get this where this is just touching this piece of this tool. So in this case, it's not doing that right now. And we're going to take a screwdriver and make sure that everything is still moving okay. And we can see it comes up to a certain point with the spring, but it doesn't come up enough. So what we're going to do to fix that, I'm going to use a couple of screwdrivers. I'm going to use one to kind of hold this stationary. And then we're going to come over here with another one, so if I can get it where you guys can see. And we're going to try to slowly bend this little lever up. Ever so slightly. And this is something you're going to have to do like trial and error wise. All right, so we're still, if we zoom in here, right, I don't think you can see yet, we're just almost there. You want this just to barely touch this. Just barely touch it without making it get activated. So one more upward bend should do the trick. Let me see if I can give you some extra light too. So I'm going to do the same thing one more time. I'm going to come in under here. Just very gently coax that lever up. Yeah, that looks good. So now let me put you under a magnifying glass just to make sure this is coming through okay. And you can see what we're after. All right, so here under a magnifying glass, hopefully now you guys can see, we just want this to barely touch that lever without actuating it. And now we've got this adjusted where we want it. All right, with that adjusted, I'm going to give it one last spritz of air, just in case any dust or debris got in here while we were fiddling around with everything. And now we're going to complete this last piece of assembly. So on the bottom piece with the index valve and the needle valve, the gasket is what's going to go on first. It's kind of like the opposite of what we did on top with the fuel pump. So the fuel diaphragm, we had that go on first, then the gasket when we were on this side. But on the bottom here, the gasket's going to go on first, and then the indexing diaphragm is going to go on. It's going to go in this position right here, right? So you got these two little studs that help you line up that edge. And then this cover on this model with this hole, that's going to face the adjusting valves. Get a couple of these screws started by hand so that everything is lined up, diaphragm and gasket wise. You always want to start these by hand because it's steel going into a softer metal. Okay, we'll snug this. Caddy corner, we'll snug this. We'll go back on this side. And then we'll go on this side, caddy corner. Okay, we just want to make sure that the gasket and the diaphragm look okay, and then we'll go ahead and snug it down. There's no torque value. You don't want to strip it, so just go until it feels snug. Definitely don't want to force anything on these little guys. And with that, we are done. We have rebuilt this WT210 and we're ready to reassemble it on the engine, at which point we can then begin to adjust the high and the low valve screws here, and then, if necessary, also the idle adjusting screw that's up here. So I also told you before we wrap up that I'd show you the service manual for this little guy, and that's this one right here for the WT series. I'll put a link to where you can download this. Now, don't be intimidated by the number of parts you see on the parts explosion, because this is meant to cover the WT, the WA, and the WTA all in one manual. This manual then will go in, besides showing you all these different parts, it'll talk about the theory of operation. It'll talk about what happens when you get ready to try and start the engine, so the starting circuit. It'll talk about adjusting idle and adjusting the high speed. And my advice is just go with what the engine manufacturer writes up for this, because this is pretty generic. But on the back here, what's useful is the disassembly. So this is just basically summarizing what I just took you all through, the level of disassembly that we did, some of the steps that we did, the things that we removed and discarded, and the things that we replaced from the service manual, and the inspections and items you want to check. And then they talk about the reassembly process, some special tools that I mentioned during the video that they recommend that you have. And then here is kind of a view of the WA, WT, and WTA showing that adjustment that we just went through. Earlier when we did the welch plugs, I mentioned the special tool that they use. I showed you how to do it with an automatic center punch. So I hope this video helps you out in rebuilding one of these little Walbro carburetors and using genuine OEM parts to get it done. If you don't use genuine OEM parts, I'm going to give you a warning. The adjustment on this index may need to be different for non-OEM parts. I have heard about folks running into problems using the OEM adjustment that we see right down here. This adjustment is only going to work for OEM parts. I can't tell you why. I just know there's a lot of forum posts out there that when you try to use this adjustment for non-OEM parts, it doesn't work. So just bear that in mind. And my advice is just buy OEM parts. You won't have to mess around with that kind of stuff. Quality is something that pays, not costs. Anyway, if you got questions or comments, go ahead and leave it below and I'll try to help. If you found this useful and it helped you get your carburetor rebuilt and save you some money by doing it yourself, I'd appreciate you paying it forward and hit that like button. And as always, thanks for watching.